Hey guys, Mrs. Horn here. Today I have some notes to help you relearn and review the Ecology and Human Impact Unit. Please have a pen or a pencil ready to go so that you can write down all of the notes I'm about to give you. On the front page, I've made a list of the most important vocabulary for this topic. Later in our review activities, you're going to have an opportunity to practice these words through a matching activity. You may also want to use the list and make your own note cards to help you get ready for the test. Feel free to pause the video as we go through if you need more time to write things down or catch up. Let's get started. The term ecology represents the study of all living things with their environment. So anything that's alive, living out in the environment, that would go under the category of ecology. Now, all of that stuff can be organized into 4 levels. I like to make that diagram show the 4 levels in circles. Our smallest level, so inside the small circle, I want you to label it population, and then community, and then ecosystem, and then the big circle that includes everything is the biosphere. With the bottom of the page, I've explained what each one of those levels means. The biosphere I wrote in really big letters because that includes all of the living things on the earth. If it's living and it's on the earth, it is part of the biosphere. So anything from the top of the tallest mountain that's alive to the bottom of the deepest ocean, if it's alive, that's part of the biosphere. Now, within the biosphere, we have many different kinds of ecosystems. And an ecosystem is an area that includes living and non-living things. So the rainforest is an ecosystem, the desert is an ecosystem, the forest in your backyard is an ecosystem because it has both living and non-living things there. Within that ecosystem, we could get a little bit smaller and we can talk about the communities that are there. So a community is when there's more than one population in an area. But a community is only the living things. So a community could be all of the white-tailed deer, plus the fox population, plus the rabbit population. All those populations together make up a community. And then if we get even smaller, we get more individualized. And that is where the center of the circle is really, really small, a population. Population is just one kind of organism in an area. So if we think of what I just listed for the community, pick one of those things, and that's one population. Now, the next slide I have, it's got a lot going on. It's very busy. And we're going to start in the center of the page. So I want you to start right here where it talks about ecosystems. And we know that ecosystems include both the living and the non-living things. Okay, then we're going to follow the arrow this way. And we need to know that ecosystems can be limited. Okay, they can be limited by both abiotic factors, which is up here in the purple, and biotic factors. Before we talk about those, let's keep sliding over to the right and talk about a limiting factor. So what's a limiting factor? What does that mean? So a limiting factor is something that could either help or hurt a living thing from being successful. So for example, a plant needs water to live. If water is available, that's going to help them grow. If water is not available and it's a time of a drought, well, that's going to prevent them from producing a fruit or a vegetable or changing in size. Now, if we consider the biotic factor, so what is a biotic factor? A biotic factor is something that is non-living, like light, oxygen, water, wind, even temperature. These are all things that are not alive, but can limit living things. Temperature can limit living things, whether the temperature is too hot or the temperature is too cold. Not all plants do well in extreme temperatures. Some require something very specific. Other factors that can limit living things are biotic factors. And biotic factors are living or something that was once living. So other animals can affect an organism. Other plants can affect an organism. Diseases that involve bacteria or fungus, those might infect a population. Parasites are a biotic factor that may affect a living thing in an organism. Let's talk about cycles. Now, all ecosystems have things that cycle through the ecosystem, and they need to do that in order for the area to remain stable. So a cycle is when materials are used and they move through an ecosystem and are reused. Things like carbon and nitrogen and water. I have a picture of the carbon cycle here. Now, if we look over on the right part of the diagram, I've got a rabbit, I've got some dead things, and then I have some bacteria. In my list of bullets, what I'm saying is that all of those things release carbon. They release it in the form of carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide is released by plants, animals, dead organisms, and decomposers. Now that carbon dioxide is then used on the other side of the diagram. It's used by plants, and they use it for photosynthesis. Those plants then release, up here, oxygen. They release the oxygen, and then if we continue with our cycle, all of these things over here on the right are then going to use that oxygen to make more carbon dioxide. And that's why we call it a cycle, because it's a continuous, repetitive action. The nitrogen cycle, so we have nitrogen that's in the air. It's atmospheric nitrogen. You would write it with a capital N and a little 2 next to it. And we have nitrogen in the air. There's also some in the soil. But plants need nitrogen, but they can't use it in that way. They can't use the regular atmospheric nitrogen. So conveniently, there's a bunch of bacteria that live in the soil, and they take that nitrogen and they change it into a form of nitrogen that's more usable by plants, which is very convenient for the plants. The plants then use that form of nitrogen and then they release it back into the atmosphere, or animals eat the plants, and then that's how animals get nitrogen. And then that nitrogen eventually gets back into the soil, and then the bacteria can reconfigure that molecule again for the plants. And last but not least, I put the water cycle on here, which you've learned about this since elementary school, so I didn't put a ton of details, but this is how water is going to move through an ecosystem. Remember that in all of these cycles, no material is ever lost or removed. It's just changing form as it moves through the cycle. On the next page, I have a bunch of vocabulary. These are all terms that you've learned through elementary school into middle school, and then again in living environments. So I have a definition of the term, and then I have a picture. So hopefully when you're thinking of these words, you have something to remember what it looks like. So a producer or an autotroph, these are the plants. These are things that are going to change light energy into chemical energy, and they're going to do that through photosynthesis. The opposite of a producer would be a consumer, or we can also call them heterotrophs. This group of organism has to eat other things in order to get energy. They can eat plants, they can eat animals, they can eat fungus, they can eat bacteria. They just have to eat something else, and that's how they get their energy. Herbivores, these are organisms that eat only plants because that's what their digestive system is set up for. We can also call these group of organisms primary consumers. Decomposers are pretty essential to all ecosystems. These organisms are going to break down organic matter and then put those nutrients back into the soil. I have the picture is our mushrooms. Bacteria can be decomposers. Earthworms can be decomposers. So there's a variety of things that play this role in an ecosystem, but they are essential to restoring those nutrients to the soil. Predators, these are going to hunt and kill a prey. And then the prey, these are the things that are hunted by predators. I've got two different pictures that show some different examples. We find predators and prey in any ecosystem you're looking at. And then the last two on the page also are a good pair. Not a good pair, I wouldn't want to be the host, but they go together is what I meant. A parasite is going to rely on a host for nourishment. And the picture I have here is a tick. Now a tick needs a host, and that host, like these cute little puppies, are going to provide a habitat, so a place for that tick to live. And the puppies are also going to provide a source of food for the parasite. So that little tick is going to burrow its head in under the skin of that puppy or another animal or you, and it's going to feed off the fluids of their body. Now typically the host is going to be harmed by the parasite. The parasite doesn't want to kill the host because then they're out of a home and they're out of food. But the host is not healthy when it's being consumed on by a parasite. Let's talk about energy. Energy is passed from one trophic level to the next, or it's lost as heat. So those are the options that we need to know. We also need to know that energy is not moving around in a cycle. Energy is not recycled. So unlike nitrogen and carbon and water, there's no energy cycle. Energy moves, but not through a cycle. Energy moves through a food chain. We have to know the difference between a food chain and a food web. Now a chain is going to show the path of energy between organisms. So the plant has energy, then it goes to the insect, then it goes to the mouse, then it goes to the owl. You'll notice that this food chain is very linear. It's in a straight line, and it shows you the direction of only one path of energy flow, from here to here to here to here, and that's it. A food web looks very different, looks a little more confusing. It's got a lot going on. The web shows the path of energy throughout the entire ecosystem. So all of these organisms might live in the same ecosystem, and there's lots of arrows going on in the diagram. So the food web shows many options for energy transfer. Food web also has decomposers in it, which a food chain usually doesn't show that. And the last diagram I want to show that works with energy is an energy pyramid. Now, you know the shape of a pyramid. It's really big in the bottom, gets really small on top. So I need you to think of that because the bottom, because it's the biggest, represents the greatest amount of energy. That's going to be the bottom trophic level, which is always going to be our plants, our producers, autotrophs. As we go up each level, the available energy is going to decrease. From level to level to level, each level is only getting 10% passed on to them. So of all the energy that the producers have, which is a lot, when those herbivores eat the plants, they're only getting 10%. So what happens to the rest of the energy? So you've got 90% of the energy that isn't going up to the next level. Well, that's because the plants need energy. They need energy to live, so they're selfish and they're keeping the energy for themselves. And then all organisms lose a little bit of energy as heat. So 90% of the energy stays at that level because organisms are using it or losing it as heat. So then only 10% is left over to get moved up the trophic levels. talk about ecological succession. And succession is a gradual process. It's not something that happens very quickly, but it's a change in an ecosystem over time. Don't get this confused with evolution. This is not evolution. We're not changing an actual population of organisms, but we are changing what's available in the area. The idea of succession shows us that if we were to leave an area and not mow it and not do anything with it over a long period of time, that it's naturally going to change. New things are going to move in. New things are going to grow there. So nothing remains the same, and habitats are constantly changing if we don't disturb them. So the picture I have is a great picture of succession because it shows that if you start an area with small plants, maybe some flowering plants or even grass, and you were to let that area stay and don't mow it, don't cut it down, just leave it alone, it's naturally going to make way for seeds of shrubs or bigger plants, which is then naturally going to make way for taller things like pine trees, and then eventually develop into a climax community which is made up of mostly deciduous trees. Those are trees that are going to lose their leaves. And they're very tall and they're very big and they have very deep roots in all of the soil. This process, it could take hundreds of years. It could actually only take 20 to 50 years. Any field that stays undisturbed, you don't mow it for a while, this process is going to start happening. And as succession of plants changes, then new animals and birds and reptiles and bugs are going to move in or move out depending on what's available for them to live in or hide in or eat. So ecological succession is when an ecosystem changes over time. In an ecosystem, organisms are going to compete for stuff. So I have a list of things that they might compete for. Food and water are obvious choices. They might be competing for space. If you're a plant, you might be competing for light. So whoever can grow the tallest or spread their leaves out the most are going to get the greatest amount of light absorbed. Organisms sometimes compete for mates. And then anything that's growing roots might be competing for minerals in the soil. The term carrying capacity that I've added over here, so you didn't originally have that on your packet, but I did add it in. And we need to know what this is because um, all of these things over here on the left, which organisms compete for, there isn't usually a ton of those things. They're usually limited. So depending on how much food is available would depend on how many things can live there. So the carrying capacity is an actual number of organisms that an ecosystem can support. So if we talk deer, deer need to eat things. They are herbivores. They need to eat plants. So if there's not enough food in an area, the capacity of that ecosystem might be very low. And if you compare it to another area where there's lots of food available, well then maybe the capacity might be a little higher. So the carrying capacity is an actual number of organisms that an ecosystem can support without them dying, and then they can stay healthy. Two other terms that I have on this page, and I put them in boxes because I want you to know that a habitat is part of an organism's niche. So that's why I made the habitat box inside of the niche box. In my example here are the bees. So a niche, that's what an organism does for an ecosystem. What does it do? What is its purpose in an ecosystem? And the bees, their purpose is to, well, one of their purposes is to pollinate flowers, and they're very helpful for our apple trees. Well, their habitat is where they actually live. So they don't live on an apple tree, but they live back in their hive with all of the other bees. but the habitat is part of what they do. It's part of their niche. Another important term for the ecology unit is biodiversity. Biodiversity is having many different kinds of living things in an area, so many populations, many populations in an area, whether it's plants, animals, bacteria, fungus, all different kinds of living things in the same space. And this is good. We want that. We want that because a variety of individuals and species, well, we need that to keep the ecosystem stable, especially if that environment is going to start changing, maybe due to severe weather or constant flooding or yearly hurricanes or even a temperature change. The temperature is rising 1 degree every year. Well, then we need lots of different types of living things so that some can survive that change. Remember that biodiversity means stability. So where we have lots of different living things, we have a stable environment. If we were to lose it, if biodiversity were to be lost, what's going to happen is that organisms are going to lose some food sources. They're going to lose places to live. We're going to upset food webs and the flow of energy. And when those things happen, that's when the ecosystem gets unstable. I've added a question to the bottom here because it's important to know, well, what might do that? What might be there that's going to mess up biodiversity? So what might impact biodiversity? Over here on the right, I've got a whole list of things. There could be natural disasters. So a hurricane, a tornado, a tsunami. Those are all things that we have no control over that could impact an ecosystem so severely that it's going to lower the biodiversity of an area. And then the rest of the list is all due to human intervention, deforestation, even farming, which seems like a good thing, and it is. But when you farm, you're only planting one type of thing, so there's no diversity at all there. Urban development, more houses, more shopping malls, more parking lots. Those are all things that decrease biodiversity. Global warming, so when the temperature increases, not everything can survive. Even pollution of land, pollution of water or of air. And then invasive species, which I'm going to talk about on the next page. These are all things, whether natural or unnatural, all those things affect how diverse an ecosystem can be. All right, on the next page, I want to start in the middle. So let's talk about an invasive species. And in the top left, in the blue box, I've got a definition. So an invasive species is any organism that's been moved to a new ecosystem. And it's usually something that's not supposed to be there. And in most of the examples I can think of, it's because humans moved them, maybe on purpose or maybe by mistake. Some characteristics of a really good invasive species. So if you're an invasive species, you're going to be very successful in your new home if you reproduce very quickly, if you reproduce with many offspring. So if you're a plant and you release lots and lots of seeds, that's really good for you. If you have no natural predators, so if in your new home there's nothing there to eat you, that's great for you. And also if you're very fast growing, so if you can grow faster and spread farther than all of the native organisms there, that's also really good for you. However, it's not so good for all the native species. So down here in the red box here, an invasive species is going to harm an ecosystem by competing with all of the native organisms. So they compete for space, they compete for food, and in a lot of cases, they're going to push out the native organisms. I've got some examples here. Purple loosestrife is a plant. It's really pretty, nice purple flowers on it. Flowers at the end of July into August. And it was brought here because it looked really nice. And for a long time, it didn't have any natural predators, so it spread and spread and spread and actually took over areas where cattails normally lived. And now that has become a problem because we have animals that need the cattails, and cattails are becoming fewer in number. I have some other examples listed here. You may remember talking about some of these in class. And then I've got one more page. The last page of the notes talks about renewable energy and non-renewable energy. And I've got a picture here, which hopefully is a good visual, which you'll remember what's on each side of the page. So the renewable energy, these are things like sunlight, water, geothermal, which is heat from the earth, or even wind energy. So renewable energy, these are all sources that are always available. They're not going to be something that we could use up. They're also things that we can make more of or capture more pretty quickly. And then our non-renewable energy like coal or natural gas or fossil fuel oil, we will run out of these things. So these are sources of energy that cannot be replenished. Once we use them up, we can't make more in a timely manner, so we are out of them. Non-renewable means we're going to run out of them. Well, that's a quick review of everything really, really important for ecology and human impact, and I hope this helps.